Hi guys, welcome to Counterpoints. My name is Connor. Today we're going to be talking to Gasim again, one of our old friends from what feels like forever ago, but was probably like 3 months ago.
Yeah,
Like,
it was roughly then.
yeah. But I've done some debate shows since we last talked. Maybe shared some of my more chud perspectives on religion and the world and geopolitics and all that kind of stuff. So we were kind of going to get into that. I'm actually going to articulate what I said in a previous debate, and then Gassim's going to kind of take it apart for us a little bit. So one of the things that I articulated previously that I felt like Islam was fairly unique in, and I'll try to expand it actually to other takes, since when you're yelling with seven people, you don't get to say everything you want to say.
Sure.
So with Judaism specifically, I view that as a monotheistic religion, but I view it as very isolated. It's not a universalist religion. It's not for everybody. It's for a unique in group.
Mhm.
Christianity is a universalist religion, but it requires that you believe in multiple. I don't want to say multiple deities, but it requires that you believe in the Trinity, like
Trinity.
Jesus. Yeah, Jesus Christ is God. Islam, on the other hand, is very universalist because it's monotheist, but it's also universalist. Not only that, but there's a hierarchy inside Islam as far as like religious faith, and that hierarchy, as I understand it, is Muslims first, people of the book second, so Christians and Jews. And then after that, it's pagans, and then I think the worst thing you could be from a Quranic standpoint is atheist, and that hierarchy and that universalism kind of ties into what I would view similar to like Christian evangelicism, where like you want to spread the faith to as many places around the world as possible, but then what the potential danger is like we're in a secular society. Atheism, agnosticism. I don't think homosexuality is as big of a deal in the Quran, but I could be wrong.
It's not,
Basically,
but it's a big deal in Islam, even though it's not a big deal in the Quran, but it's a whole big thing.
right. So basically, like we have a whole bunch of like secular impulses in the West, when it comes to atheism and homosexuality, LGBTQ rights, all that kind of stuff. And whether we like it or not, with that religious hierarchy, there's going to be a conflict between secular values, humanist values, and Quranic values. And like I don't see that. I think there's a way to get past it, but I do see that as uniquely difficult to bridge that gap between like secular, humanist, atheist society, and the Quranic Islamic view of the world. And I'd love for you to take that apart.
Sure. Um, I would say that's just true for all fundamentalist religion. Like, if you're gonna be a fundamentalist, that's just true because regardless of which scripture, which religion you look at, if you're gonna try and follow the exact wordings, the laws, like described in any of these scriptures, they don't mesh very well with our modern society, secular or not.
Mhm.
So that's just true for all religions. Um, the I think the main point of contention we have is the what's inherently Islamic versus what is commonly Islamic. I
Mhm.
think I would agree with you that like the Islamic faith right now is uniquely different from some of the other faiths in terms of the dominant interpretations, and the dominant dogma is somewhat problematic when it comes to like a lot of modern secular values and worldviews and whatnot. But that's just because of how Islam evolved over the last 50 years. I would say it was probably better 60, 70 years ago before Wahhabism became like a mainstream thing. I would say Islam was probably more relaxed than maybe like even some many broad sects of Christianity.
Mhm.
But due to the geopolitics of the Middle East and how um, like some monopolies on interpretation, the common understanding of a lot of Islamic stricture can be categorized as problematic. See, in that regard, I wouldn't disagree with you. I'm just saying that I don't think there's anything inherent in Islamic scripture, and even in some like even the common understanding, to some degree there's a lot of good, nice moral stuff going on there, as long as other not such great interpretations and understanding of stuff.
Well, so I just want to articulate this because one of the things that was difficult for me, especially finally getting around to reading the Quran, which I think I encourage everybody to do. It's a 14-hour audiobook. It's not very long, like if you're chilling, everybody has 3 hours of fucking like a day to listen to like Vosh or Destiny or Mike from PA like rail into each other or whatever. You got 14 hours to listen to the Quran.
Yeah,
Like, let's be real here. So so basically, one of the things that I found challenging though was two scriptures, and the Bible does have parallels, by the way. So I'm not trying to pretend that it's not unique.
sure.
But the one that I found like really tough to get past from like oftentimes people in the West, secular people, humanists, like Protestants, like liberals, they're like, oh well, Islam, it's kind of in a rough spot right now. But if they have a reformation, if they have a reform, then they'll be just as chill as everybody else, and everything will be cool.
Mhm.
But one of the things that I read that was like really frustrating was I literally think it was in the second surah. There's this passage that basically says like people who claim to be reformers, who say that they're believers but they just want to modify the faith a little bit, but then they go home with their disbelieving friends and they laugh and they're like, oh, we're not actually believers, we don't believe in any of that nonsense, and for them is like a great punishment, like all that kind of stuff. And what
Mhm.
I think is really difficult about that passage is it kind of gives license. So even if you had like a good faith reformer or somebody who was saying like, hey guys, like this application of the Quran is like a little messed up, like we need to move in this direction. I don't see how that passage wouldn't be thrown in their face like, oh, you're not actually a believer. You're not actually like, rooted deeply in your faith. You're actually a reformer, and you're not even a reformer, you're actually a disbeliever, you're trying to water this down, you're trying to get us away from fundamentalism. And I just don't like that was such a challenge that it actually blackpilled me for at least a few surahs.
Sure. I would have to look at the specific phrasing. It might be a translational thing because I can't think of a like I think we mentioned this the last time. As far as I know, the only thing I can think of is people who are the word isn't reformer. The word is munafiq, which is basically hypocrite. Like no, hypocrite's not even a good word. I guess hypocrite is the literal translation, but this one is basically specifically
Mhm.
pretending to be religious while you're actually not religious. And that was the thing. And here's the thing. Um, there is actually a lot of ways to get around. Like even if you look at how people interpret the Quran right now, because the Quran came out like when the Prophet was alive, and there was lots of
Mhm.
things happening like during his lifetime,
Mhm.
and a lot of it would come down in specific response to stuff that was happening at the time right there. So whenever you have people trying to interpret the Quran, a lot of the times they look at so why did this come down, when did it come down, in what context did it come down, as they try to interpret it. So you'll find like a passage that's kind of aggressive and all warlike, and it
Mhm.
probably came out
During like
came to a prophet,
literally
yeah,
right before a
during,
battle.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well,
uh,
so you hit on two common, I don't want to say defenses, but like two common contextualizations that I think are really interesting. So
sure.
one of them being that like translating directly from Arabic doesn't go right into English, basically. Like there are like context clues and like verbiages and words that are different.
Mhm,
So basically like I wouldn't mind literally like sending you the surah, because if it's wanafic and it's like hypocrite,
mhm.
then like hypocrite is way different than reformer. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like you could say,
absolutely.
like yeah, you could say like, oh, this person never believed to begin with. They're not a
Mhm,
reformer. They're a liar. They're a
mhm,
hypocrite.
mhm,
So that would be interesting information, because with that gives more play, right?
mhm,
And
mhm,
also to me that would give more credence to the defense of like you're not working with a one for one contextualized Arabic to English definition, so there's more context that you need to understand.
mhm,
That strengthens that argument. The second one is the historical argument, because basically what I heard, this was another argument that I thought was really interesting, was that if you read the Quran without historical context, it's actually really easy to arrive at like a jihadist interpretation. But if you were to read the Quran with historical context, then it's actually a lot harder. And that's where it almost like it benefits the more historically educated, to understand the Quran than it does like the lay person to read that and only that, and then people can kind of like mold that into whatever propaganda, enemies, friends, allies, wanafic, like that you want,
Sure.
without the
Sure.
historical context.
I would say like there's no way you can become a jihadist or anything really unless you're, like most fundamentalists, very selective in what you want to follow. Like cherry pick what parts of the religion you want to follow and ignore the rest.
What
Because
what do you think are like the more pro, like so for instance, like I take contention with that, but maybe I'm ignorant to something. What do you think about the religion or the Quran or whatever kind of promotes like a more peaceful or moderate or um how do you not arrive at a jihadist interpretation? What are the
sure.
strengthening parts?
Well, there's countless stories like forms of prophet in terms of like the choices he made when he won battles, when he didn't win battles, when he had the option to negotiate, he would always pick the option to negotiate if there's something going on. There's like outright ayat, which are like sections of a surah. Like in Al-Baqarah, which is I guess chapter 2, there's an ayat that says basically, you may fight those that fight you, but you may not aggress because God does not love aggressors.
Mm,
So basically, this is saying like you cannot go around, randomly killing people. You can only fight in self-defense. Um, there's lots of stuff regarding like people of different religions. There's a whole surah about like how everyone has their own religion, and like you should just let people like be according to their own religion. You have your own religion, and it's basically God that will judge everyone. There's another surah, sorry, ayah that's I was gonna say. Um, uh, I had it. It will come back to me. Um,
it's
but
okay.
there's
I already got two places to go.
yeah, yeah. No, no, there's plenty. Like there's stuff about like how to treat prisoners. There's stuff about forgiveness. Like there's stuff about if you kill someone unjustifiably, that means you've killed basically everyone. Like in the eyes of God, if you kill one person unjustifiably, it's as if you killed everyone. And if you save one
I'm,
person's life, it's as
mhm.
if you saved everyone. Um,
Well, let me. So I want to get to. I I'm about to bust out like a sticky notes because I have so many places to go. So I'm familiar. I'm familiar with that passage where it's basically like. And it was said until the people of Israel, if you killed one man, it's as if you killed all of mankind, and if you saved one man, it's as if you saved all of mankind.
mhm.
But then like literally the next passage is like, but for those who spread corruption in the land, their lot in this life is XYZ, and let's just say like it's not good. Like it's
Mhm.
not good. And corruption to me is such a, especially in English, it's such a wide word. Like
Mhm.
corruption could be like I try to give alcohol to a 16-year-old and tell him like alcohol is okay, or
Sure.
corruption could be like rape or incest or murder or political corruption or something like that. Corruption is such
Sure.
a wide term.
It is.
um
I agree.
so
And that's a feature of religion. It's hard
mhm.
to. It's
Well,
supposed to be
do
this
you
objective scripture that. Um,
well, that's my question, is do you think that that is like an acceptable interpretation of the following verse, is that like for those who spread corruption in the land, that corrupt, whatever the word is in that surah, it actually is as flexible as corruption in English is?
well, the word I guess is fasadun fil ard, which is corruption on earth, literally. So it is the literal translation.
Yeah.
And fasad actually does mean corruption. So fasad can actually be like financial corruption. Like
Hmm.
there's lots of types of corruption. My
Okay.
understanding is the common interpretation of the word is specifically like unrest, insecurity, like banditry, armed banditry, stuff like that. That's like the way we were taught, as far as I can remember.
Okay.
That is like the common interpretation. It's not just like financial corruption or whatever.
Okay, yeah, because
Um,
I don't want to be like crucified or lose a hand for financial corruption. Not that I'm
sure.
currently engaged in financial corruption, but I might have downloaded some software programs onto my computer that I wasn't entitled to have. So, um,
Sure.
yeah. So okay. So that was one thing, and then there's this thing like there are, let's just be real, like anti Christian, anti Muslim. folks, I guess is the right way to, or the nice way to put them. And they talk about this concept called like abrogation or subrogation. I forget.
Hmm.
But
Is
like
that the
the
jizya?
what's that?
Is that the jizya? Is that when you have Christians or Jewish people living, they have to pay money?
No, 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 no. It's
Okay.
more like it was more like a historical context of like how to read the Quran, which I have no basis to believe that this is necessarily like in Islamic societies, but this is what like Christian anti-Muslims or anti-Islamists say is that like as you proceed through the Quran, you're supposed to like take the most recent translation or the most recent surah kind of like chronologically. That way, like the latter half of the Quran
Oh,
takes
oh,
more
I know
precedence
what you're
than the
saying.
former half of the Quran.
I know what you're saying.
Mhm.
That is a doctrine. It has a name. It has a name. I forget the Arabic name, but yeah,
The,
that is a doctrine. It's obviously
mhm.
like some latter parts override like all the parts,
Mhm.
but that's just very arbitrary. Like
Yeah.
it's that's just something like religious clerks and leaders came up with because it's not described anywhere.
Mhm.
It's just something religious clerks decided upon, and then they pick which yansakh, yansakh, that's the word, nasakh.
Mhm.
Uh, and they just decided which ayat yansakh which other ayat and but yeah, it is. I will say it is a common understanding slash doctrine, especially in Wahhabism. But
Well,
uh,
so for
I don't
instance,
see the roots for it like in scripture.
okay. Well, and then with so for instance, like the kind of my beef with that, or should I be alarmed by Wahhabism then? Because so for instance,
Oh,
like
you probably should.
okay, all right, cool. All right, just checking in if we should be a little alarmed by Wahhabism, and then yeah, so I guess let's get into that. So it's hard to know, it's hard to contextualize how alarmed anybody should be about anything, right?
Mhm.
Like we're in a global society, seems like cell phones and the internet is increasing access and communication. Seems like it's increasing people's access to information. The fact that we can even have this conversation is kind of fucking wild.
Mhm.
So basically, like I see these like secular influences of the West, Western media, promotion of LGBTQ, humanism, secularism, all that kind of stuff. I see that in our pop media, and I see our pop media being consumed by the world. I also hear stories that I don't know how to contextualize about the Saudi kingdom basically creating madrasas worldwide in order to promote the Wahhabist interpretation. And then I want to say that like maybe they've backed off in the past 5 to 10 years because America
Sure.
like wagged their fingers at them or something like that.
Yeah. About time,
Um,
but
but I don't know like how long is that going to be sustained for? Is that just because we wag their fingers? Are they going to go back to it as soon as we turn our backs? Like what's the what's kind of the deal?
I think it will probably be sustainable because if you look at it, like there was a kind of a symbiotic relationship between the religious leaders and the ruling family in Saudi Arabia in the past.
Mm.
But the religious leaders now have, for the most part, also due to exposure and globalization and such, have kind of become much more progressive or reformist. You can see that like in the past couple of kings in Saudi Arabia.
Is this a
Well, there was
very
a
recent development? Is this like literally the
yeah,
past 5 or 10 years?
yeah, it was in like the last 10 years, I'd say.
Wow. Yeah.
Hmm. Like even they used to have in Saudi Arabia. They used to have these like morality police or whatever. That's gone. That was a few years back.
Are you serious? Because like,
Yeah,
they're gone?
yeah, they don't operate anymore.
That's insane. Because
Mhm.
that was like Western, like anti-Muslim Western propaganda for like a really long time, right? It was like,
Well, I can see why. It's a very
yeah,
silly concept, but yeah, but
yeah.
it's gone. Um, but yeah, there's like for the most part, I say the like ruling class, especially the political ruling class in Saudi Arabia, has kind of moved or are moving past that. So I don't see them going back. And they're not just moving past that because the U.S. wagged at them. I think the U.S. wagging their fingers them just kind of uh, like prompting them to do something about it instead of just because it doesn't really affect them in any meaningful way. So they just, instead of ignoring the headache and hassle of having to fight the religious ruling class, they just, I think, like moved forward and went ahead with taking more power, consolidating more power.
Yeah. Well, so let me ask this then, because this is like another line of attack for like Western anti-Muslim folks, is basically like the concept of the caliphate, like that theocracy or that like religious rule within a country is not necessarily separate. That it's harder, at least like scripturally, to separate a religious life from like a domestic life. There's not this hard line that seems to exist in Western secular societies between like religion, society, how people interact, like all that kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
And that was one of the causes
I
for
had.
concern,
Mhm.
because if you look at like public polls and it's like, hey, would you like to live in an Islamic theocracy, or do you think that the Quran should be like the basis for like societal law, and like approval for that is actually fairly popular.
Sure.
So that was kind of something that, like, as somebody who views any kind of theocracy as a problem, that's alarming. That's actually kind of terrifying. So like,
No, I
how
agree.
does that
Not a,
how
not
does
a,
that
not a
work?
fan of theocracy either. I had an interesting discussion on the Discord a couple of days. Well, I guess it was yesterday about this. I
Hmm.
had an argument with two people at Discord because they were trying to say stuff about how like Islam kind of entails a specific political governance system and a secession system. And I was like, no, that's just not the case. They
Hmm.
didn't believe me, but oh well. But so for me, it's not that complicated. If you ask most people, like in any of these countries, they will say yes, Sharia, theocracy, blah blah blah. If you ask them what that means and try to like ask them to describe how that works, none of them will be able to come up with an answer. And that's just because it's what they're taught. Like,
Right.
simply speaking, this is what you're taught in school. This is what you're taught in high school. This is probably what you're taught in college. In some cases, like in Sudan, because we have Islamic studies even once you hit like college.
Hmm.
So it's what you taught and it's what you know, and it's like yeah, that's what God said, and that's what makes sense. But if you ask him like specifics, like okay, so what does that mean? Like how does that work? What's the governance system? And it's not about the Khilafah, Caliphate, none of that stuff, because
Hmm.
because for example the parties that advocate for that in Sudan is called Hizb al-Ba'ath, and they
Hmm.
have like less than a fraction of a percentage support.
Hmm.
No one cares for them. uh, Everyone just wants the concept of a theocracy or a Sharia, but in reality, no one knows what that means, how that entails. So if I talk to them, it's like, okay, so how would that work? Who gets to decide? Like, because they understand there are like different interpretations. There's different sects in Islam and so on and so forth. So it's like, okay, so how does that work? Who sets the laws? Who interprets the scripture? Who does any of the other things? How what's the common basic right? What's the rights of non-religious people? They don't have answers, and it's like, yeah, I'm not so sure how that's going to work out.
Do you,
And
one of the most, sorry, keep going.
I was going to say, and for the most part, except for like the extremely fundamentalists and like the extremists, none of them really care. Like Sudan right now, as after the revolution, because we had like an autocratic government that was based on like fundamental Islamic uh, um, uh, interpretations. I think we discussed this last time. But since then, like and because due to the backlash, and that's I think the main advantage Christianity has, and it's not again due to any inherent thing in Christianity, but the church overreached, people got fed up, they fought back, there was a
Mhm.
revolution, and secularism became like a whole big thing. Um,
Is
and
it, is
that's
that viewed as positive though? Like, in surrounding countries, surrounding nations, is basically like the Saudi royal family kind of moderating their behavior, the political shifts in Sudan, kind of like maybe these pro democracy movements that were kind of like, unfortunately, like, so for instance, Syria as an example, like, were devolved into like civil war and violence and all that kind of stuff. Like, Tunisia, I think, as another example, where basically like they had like pro democracy revolts. Libya, which is now kind of a state that, let's just say it's not doing that great. Like what's the I know you don't like live there, but I mean, like, what's kind of the appetite? Because like on an exterior perspective, it's like I'd just be fucking exhausted at this
mm,
point. Like I wouldn't want the violence anymore, because it seems like it's been secular forces, democratic forces, authoritarian rulers, whether they were theocratic or not, theocratic or jihadist forces that were trying to, run the ground, power politics, sectarianism, Shia,
sure.
Sunni, ethnic groups, like all that kind of stuff. Like it's such a headache to even divide who's fighting who and why.
Mm-hmm.
that like I can't, if I'm tired and all I'm doing is hearing about it, I can't even imagine the guys who have actually been on the ground for a decade actually trying to turn something positive out of this. Like I can't even imagine what they feel like.
Sure. And honestly, it's very complicated. Most of the struggles in that region are, I would say, like the religious aspect of it is probably like a small portion of it. It's mainly like tribal struggles, power struggles, economic struggles. I wouldn't say there isn't like religious sectarian struggles, but that's also very country dependent. Like
Mm-hmm.
because in many countries there's not a lot of sectarianism. Outside of places like Iraq, where you do have like a healthy like mix of like Shia and Sunnah. For the most part, there's not like strict sectarians in many countries. So it's like the factors that actually underlie most of these, like a lot of this conflict, is not necessarily religious, and no one cares for the most part what happens in like neighboring countries. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that's happening. Well, that's bad. I hope they do something about
Hope
it.
they figure it out. Good luck.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, it's
Well,
just like another
let me
thing.
ask you something about that because especially from like an ignorant perspective, like coming from the outside looking in, it's really easy, for me to say Shia militias, with Muqtada al-Sadr being like the leader in Iraq, and Sunni militias with I forget that guy's fucking name, but like al-Baghdadi was his successor, but the Jordanian guy who went to Usama and got seed funding, I forget his fucking name, but the guy was an asshole.
Sure.
And basically, like these people, maybe al-Sadr a little bit less, but they promoted like interreligious violence, that seemed to split fairly commonly along the Sunni Shia split.
Hmm.
And then even then, when you're looking at like jihadist organizations like Al Qaeda, or even the Islamic State, predominantly Sunni, like just fucking predominantly Sunni, varied ethnic groups, like all that kind of stuff. So it's hard for me as an outsider. Like even if somebody was talking to me about the troubles in Ireland, in between like Catholics and Protestants, if somebody was like, "Hey, is a conflict about like Catholics and Protestants?" I would be like, "No, it's not religious. It's actually like the Catholics are the fucking Irish people who have lived there forever. They hate the
Hmm.
Protestants because the Protestants are basically colonists. They want to kick the
Sure.
Protestants out of the country, but that's still like a really neat, like fairly accurate dividing line for like the factional participants." So
Sure.
how do you view that as like the division or whatever? So you're saying like if you had to pick a fucking number, I know this is a dumb question, but if you had
Hmm.
to pick a number between like religious sectarian motivation versus actual just like geopolitical, logistical, and economic strife, what would be the ratio? Would it be 90-10, 50-50, 60-40, 70-30? Like what is it?
Yeah, I would say it would be. This will vary from country to country as well, because
Mm-hmm.
like the different countries, like I said, are quite different. I would say anywhere between being 60% like not religious to like 70 to 80% not religious.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say the religious conflict would be any more than 50% in any given country, and that's only after you account for all of the mobilization that happens through religion, because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the conflict isn't like religious, but
Mm-hmm.
religion will be used to
To frame
rile
it.
up people. Yeah, yeah, to frame it, rile up people, to do all of that other stuff. But even then, like I would say, it only plays a small, at most like 50-60% of the
For an American, that's a lot, though,
right.
because like, because
For
when we kill people, it's mostly for money. That's why when you're like, I think it's like 60 to 70% geopolitical and it's 30% religious. For Americans, it's like we kill people 95% for money and like 5% for like maybe we
other,
think we're like Christian crusaders and we're harkening back to the old days and we're
yeah.
wearing this patch on our chest and I'm an infidel
I,
and all that
I,
kind
I
of
will I
bullshit.
will say this:
Yeah.
the ruling class, the people who actually drive or like send people to these wars, they
Mhm.
mostly do it for the money and power. This is like
Okay.
95%, 90% power and money. None of them are particularly religious. None of them have any underlying religious motivation to do what they do. It's strictly a power and money politics. But religion is powerful, especially in like places like in the Middle East. Like people are naturally religious. Education isn't super prioritized. Poverty is an issue. All sorts of other things that make people kind of um, go towards like fundamentalist kind of extremist approaches, or take up fundamentalist extremist approaches to religion. So it's very easy to kind of rally people around like religious framings of stuff, and people
Yeah, let
don't
me.
question or
Well,
ask question or think critically or do anything actually.
yeah, well, let me ask this question because I thought it was really interesting. So for instance, like we talked about like the hierarchy within the Quran earlier, and you also mentioned the fact that like there's actually like a surah that you could basically translate as like self defense is the only kind of violence that's justified, right? Like you could basically translate it
Yep.
as purely you are not justified in committing violence if you are
The aggressor.
the aggressor.
Hmm.
But for the geopolitical translation, the United States, at least for the time being, maybe in a few decades it'll be different, is a world hegemon. We are very interested in monopolizing the energy industry. Middle East and North Africa is, I think it's literally like Venezuela, Iran, and Saudi Arabia have like the top three proven oil reserves on the planet. Like I literally think they're the top three.
Hmm.
And you know, obviously Kuwait and Iraq are nothing to shake a stick at either.
Yeah. Compared
So
to the sizes, yeah, they have a lot.
yeah, so basically like we're gonna throw our weight around, and these countries are just gonna be like backstops to American military adventurism to maintain energy security. Um, and I see that religious framing as key to basically like creating the narrative. America is the aggressors. They're allied with Israel. They're the aggressors against the Palestinians. This is a war of self-defense. Basically, half these people are not actually true believers. They're actually like kuffar, kafirs, whatever.
Sure.
So even if they think they're Christian, they actually worship money and the devil, and they don't actually believe in God, and their culture is perverse and gross and secular, and they tolerate gay people, and they do all this
Okay, let,
bullshit.
let me ask you this.
Yeah,
What percentage of people living in countries like in the Middle East, like say Sudan, do you think believes this?
I have no idea. like,
It's no
like
more than
I
5%.
you think
I'm sure.
that like Middle Eastern or what? No, no, no. That Europeans and Americans are evil pieces of shit.
Hmm.
All right.
No more than 5%.
I mean, I'm pretty sure if you asked like Americans what they thought of people in the Middle East and North Africa, you probably get worse statistics than 5%. So
It's possible.
yeah,
So, uh, like, if you ask them, or like, are you more moral than say Western people? I would say the majority would say yes.
yeah.
If you ask them, are like they all terrible human beings and you should fight them? No more than 5%.
Okay.
Like if you ask them, depends
Considering
on
our
who you ask.
mutual history, that's actually pretty good. like considering the history of the 20th century, that's actually like an okay number.
Honestly, most people, and it depends again also from country to country. I'd say,
Hmm.
like maybe the sentiment in Iraq won't be as good.
Yeah,
Uh,
I can only imagine why. Yeah. Jesus Christ.
yeah, it depends. But if you go to like all of the Gulf, that is, I would say that it's less than 5%.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the Gulf specifically, um, and you can ask people who've been and lived to the Gulf, like they love them some Americans there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I literally just watched a documentary. It was like a Vice, like 20-minute documentary about how like American fast food is like that's the thing to do in Kuwait now. Is like if you're bored, you want to go out with the family, go to Taco Bell, go to KFC, go to Pizza Hut, like hang out, eat a big meal with the family. So
Yeah, go to malls. There's all sorts of global restaurants and whatnot. It's
mhm.
not just that. Like if um, I'm not sure if this harkens back to colonialism and imperialism, but
Mhm.
like I'm not sure. I don't like the term Western, but let's say people from Europe and the U.S.
Mhm.
are generally highly respected there. They like if you go work in the Gulf as a European person or someone from the US,
Hmm.
you will get paid more than anyone else, except for maybe the citizens. They love them, like the Gulf people, the Gulf citizens are like, like numero uno.
Yeah.
But you'll get paid more than anyone else, including other Middle Easterners who aren't part of the Gulf, including anyone from any other part of the world.
Yeah.
You'll get much more respect, um, just by virtue of being from one of those countries. And they, like I said, they love them. Some people from Europe and the US. That's just the case.
So, as a white American, oftentimes like it's very easy for me to dismiss American extremism, like mass shooters, terrorists, like right wing violence, all that kind of stuff, because it's like statistically negligible, and oftentimes like it's not targeted against me, right? It's targeted against minority folks, black folks, like people of color, gay people, all that kind of stuff. So like
Sure.
when I wake up in the morning, this is my white privilege. But I don't think about a random white person storming into an area and shoot. Like he might shoot me for random reasons. That's possible, but I don't think they would shoot me for what I look like or who I sleep with. Like that's just part of it. So extremism is a very small, but maybe like overemphasized part of American life is terrorism and mass shootings. So oftentimes I get attacked by leftists when I want to talk about like ideological motivations of like extremist organizations and all that kind of stuff, because they're like, it's the material conditions, it's the material conditions, it's the material conditions. So if we were to solve the material conditions, like improve the lot in life, everybody has like a relatively stable income, they're able to provide for their families, like all that kind of stuff. How much of jihadist extremism do you think like just evaporates with the economic
A
improvements?
very good chunk. I wouldn't say it will be eliminated. There is,
Yeah.
evidence to suggest there are people who are like, at fairly good material conditions that, joined ISIS and did other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The crushing majority are people that just did it for the money, that just needed to escape, didn't have the proper education to, reason any better,
Mm-hmm.
or brainwashed, indoctrinated, like through their childhoods and whatnot. That would be the crushing majority. But
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say it would be eliminated. It would not be zero, but the crushing majority will be washed off if material conditions would
So
support it.
so basically, like I'm kind of asking, but you think that like you would almost be able to like if we were to solve the material conditions, if we were able to solve like redistributive economics, like give the average person a good life and kind of solve some of the social and economic stratification that you see in developing countries, do you think that like jihadism would be like a very close like sociological parallel to mass shootings and terrorist attacks in the United States, where like it happens, but it's like
Yeah,
once a year,
yeah, like
20 to
Charleston shooting or like
yeah.
any other random person, just with a terrible brain and terrible set of circumstances. Yeah, that's more or
Mhm.
less what it would look like.
Okay.
And over time, here's the thing: like for the most part, if you have stuff to live for and you have like a lot to lose, it's unlikely you engage in that type of behavior.
Oh yeah, I definitely have extremist beliefs, but I have a wife and a kid, so like I can't like I got I can't I can't
Yeah,
be if Biden comes to try to take my guns or whatever, I can't just, drop off the wife and kids, like with some
yeah,
stranger and, start fighting the big igloo. I gotta feed people and shit. Like I gotta pay
totally.
bills. I gotta put food on the table. Fucking Joe Biden wins apparently, motherfucker. I'm
Yeah.
I'm kidding, but like
Uh,
the no, but like that's it's interesting to think about, because what I see now with American foreign policy, I try to beat the shit out of some leftists on a panel recently with this, is I see the Middle Eastern, or I see American foreign policy as like, is there a jihadist organization? Are they planning a attack on either an ally or us? Let's hit them with a Hellfire missile.
mm,
And then they just ask that question over and over and over and over again, and they just keep hitting people with missiles. And it's like if you don't solve the material conditions, if you don't increase diplomacy, if we don't understand each other better, if we don't have cultural interchange, if the economics don't get any better, and you just keep hitting people with fucking missiles, like you're basically creating like the material conditions
mhm.
for
You're passing
recruitment.
the buck. Yeah, exactly. So you're putting a patch that's eventually gonna, like, over time might hold stuff together, but you will get a much larger tear in the fabric later on, because you didn't actually solve anything. You just patched some holes here and there.
Yeah,
Uh,
and we have this like really sanitized understanding of it. Like, you know, we hear, oh, you know, Hellfire missile blows up, you know, militia camp in Syria or whatever. We don't think of those as people. You know, we don't think of those as
Absolutely.
people
That
with family.
detachment, that's human nature. I think like the human brain has to be detached to some degree, because like our brain can only process so much and be emotionally invested in it like so much. So I think that's just the way our brains evolve. And it makes sense. It's kind of unfortunate. I think some people with a little bit more empathy, or who like um a bit more knowledge or try to do research, they kind of get hit by the reality some more, instead of just like a news segment on CNN or Fox. They just say, "Oh yeah, like the missile X hit the target and 20 people died," and it's like, what percentage were civilian? What were the stories of those people that died? Did they
Yeah.
have parents? Were they kids? What were their dreams? What's their aspiration? What about all the other people who were just like, um, sitting there wondering when they would die, and so on and so forth. And this is another thing I was gonna say. Like, even I see this a lot. Like, even people like yourself or other people who have engaged in war and deployed in combat, while it does give them a specific perspective, they always have that fallback. They know, like, combat is rough and it can be damaging both mentally and physically. But you have in the back of your head that, you're here. This is not your country. You're fighting in war somewhere else. Eventually, you're going to ship back. You have that, comfort somewhere in the back of your head, that you're gonna head home at some point and do stuff. But
Yeah.
when you live in war, or like when like the war is where you live, that is much more devastating. And it's much easier to empathize with other people in that, and understand, like, when you hear similar stuff. Like, yeah, I get that much more.
Yeah, if somebody was talking to me, this is kind of I kind of beat up a few people on a panel show about this. It's like the way we're talking about this is so sanitized that we might as well be talking about like there's the popular
War,
like the book of Narnia, like the Chronicles of Narnia. It's literally like a fucking fantasy book.
It's a good series.
Yeah, but like that's the way we conceptualize it. Like the Sudan is not a place with people and buildings and electricity and internet and all that kind of stuff. It's fucking Narnia. Like you can go to Narnia, but you got to go through the wardrobe, and then you go on your little fucking adventure. You hit the you hit the witch with a hellfire missile, and then you come back. And that's like, but that's not reality. Like that's just the way that we kind of perceive distance and cultural difference and linguistic difference and like all that kind of stuff. The reality is that like if somebody would like hit a hellfire missile into a house across the street, and they were like, oh well, that was a jihadist terrorist and he was an asshole, and like, yeah, we killed his kids, but whoopsie, like that would fuck me up a little bit. Like that would fuck me up psychologically, that like a family was just plastered with a fucking missile a block from my house.
Yeah. And what really ticks me off the most, or annoys me, is the cavalier attitude people have towards some of these stuff. Like when Trump was speaking about the whole like torture and stuff, like language has lost all meaning, and because people aren't exposed to, like, they say things, but they have no idea what those things actually mean in reality. Yeah. So there's a very cavalier attitude. Like, at some levels of governance, I understand some hard decisions can be made. Like, for example, if you bomb a cell and an innocent bystander or someone who was walking down the road dies, that's very sad and unfortunate. It's very grave and blah 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 and all of that other stuff. And it is an actual tragic incident, but you should approach it as such, and give it the respect and contemplation deserved, instead of like just this guy like, yeah, carpet bombs this, nukes that, tortures this. It's very detached from reality.
Yeah, I would actually encourage people, because I think these conversations are really important. But if you have the stomach for it, I would encourage you to look at what we're actually talking about, like videos of violence, videos of executions, videos of drone strikes, videos of torture. There's actually a video that I don't think I'll ever forget. But it was basically like Pakistani police or Pakistani army like torturing a teenager. And what they did is they like hung his arms up behind his back, and they literally like nailed him to the wall like 3 feet off of the wall. So he was literally hanging by his shoulders behind him.
Joins. It's a common torture method in those areas.
Right. So basically it's like, then I read a story that the CIA, because they don't want to be responsible for torture and Guantanamo Bay is no longer an option, they're taking jihadist terrorists or suspected jihadist terrorists, and they're dropping them off with like either Pakistani or Afghani intelligence. That way we're not torturing them, they're torturing them. And like so like you can have this really sanitized understanding of that sentence. Oh, well, we want the intel, these are jihadist terrorists, who cares, like whatever, fuck them. That's the sanitized mentality. The reality is that a man like me, who's in his 20s or 30s, kidnapped somebody from their home in body armor, dragged them off to a different country, and is allowing them to basically have their shoulders ripped out for hours at a time by people in a different country in order to get information from them. And that is something that we are morally justifying to ourselves.
Yeah,
So
not just that, potential information, not just even potential information. Like they might give or not give information, and they might just be innocent because like there is no due process in any of this. So it's just a bunch of nonsense.
Well, and here's my thing is like, so even let's say that he is a jihadist or whatever, and that's happening to him or whatever. I just want people to acknowledge what we're doing.
Yeah,
right.
Like I said.
So even if he's like the worst scumbag in the world and actually having his shoulders ripped out of his sockets is actually tame for what he technically deserves, acknowledge what we're doing. Don't pretend that it's not there. Don't pretend that it's not real. Don't pretend that like, and here's the other thing too. So like, I'm an American power apologist, basically to mean that like, I think American hegemony, American global hegemony is better than a lot of other empires in history. And that basically it's either us, China, or Russia. And basically somebody is going to fill this power vacuum almost no matter what. And withdrawing is not necessarily an option. But that doesn't mean that I'm not cognizant of what this actually means. This means jihadists and their families are going to be struck by bombs. This means that whenever there's a conflict in the Middle East and North Africa, we're going to manipulate it to our own will. People will be killed. People will be tortured. This means that our intelligence operatives are going to sneak into other countries and give money to political leaders in order to, whether they're corrupt or benign, they're going to pay off politicians in order to manipulate American interests to the forefront. And then basically people are going to get kidnapped, murdered, raped, tortured, killed, bombed, all because we want oil. And I'm not trying to make a moral judgment. I'm just trying to say, acknowledge what we're doing.
The reality, yeah. And it's like the world is a dark place. It's got its upsides, but it's also a very dark place. And like for me, like I don't contend with the idea that the US kind of influence on global political scene and the power it has isn't bad, especially like I said, Russia, China. Take the US over Russia and China in like any day of the week. But the question is the US the best it can be?
No.
And does it live up to the morals and values it tries to,
Not even close. And that's the other thing that pisses me off. We're like, here's some freedom and democracy. I'm going to sell you some VX gas out the back door and you can bomb your neighbor with it. It's like, fuck, like really? Like that's what we did? Jesus. So that's why Liberty Sanity Project and I get into beefs, because he's always talking about how great we are, and I'm like, bro, like we sold Saddam like nerve gas when we knew what he was going to do with it. Like, let's get real about who we are and what we do.
It's a tough one.
Well, and for anybody listening, I know it sounds like I'm a bleeding heart. I'm not trying to be a bleeding heart. I'm not trying to make excuses for jihadists. If somebody straps a bomb onto somebody else and then puts them in a market and then that person detonates themselves and kills 30 people, one, that's horrible. Two, that person and their ideology needs to be fought. But let's be honest about what we're doing. Oh, I have a question actually. So there's a concept called foreign internal defense. It's something that our special forces do. It's something that the Marines do. And I was trying to explain it to a panel, but obviously we only have so much time to talk. And basically what it is instead of us coming there, drone striking people or whatever, instead of us coming there, sneaking out in the middle of the night and kicking in doors, what you essentially do is you put like 10 to 20 man teams on the ground, and they train the police and they train the military forces. And then they do raids, but they do raids with the police and the military forces that they actually trained. So it's actually domestic security forces, people who speak the language, people who know the culture, people who know the cities, like all that kind of stuff. What do you think about that as like a form of like a blend of soft power and hard power?
No, absolutely. That's. I think that's very reasonable. It
Hmm.
makes a lot more sense. It's much more targeted. It's less. It's much less interference.
It's a
It
lot less
looks good
expensive too.
aesthetically. It's less expensive. It looks better aesthetically. Um, like like in terms of, you can spin that much better if you talk about yeah, like on a local level and then on the international level. Like, yeah, we're cooperating with these people to get
Mhm.
something done, as opposed to, yeah, we're just doing our thing in this other place over there, and whatever happens, happens.
Right.
Hmm.
And then another thing that I just want to mention, even if we don't talk about it much, is one of the things that's like really technologically sophisticated that a lot of these countries don't have. It doesn't seem like they have the capacity for at this time. Is an air force, and that's actually
Oh,
like
yeah,
one of
they're
the.
terrible.
What's that?
Oh yeah, the air forces are terrible. Like, even
Mm.
like, on my understanding, even some of the countries that have like some air force, it's mainly just operated for the most part through the U.S., like places like Saudi Arabia and the UAE and whatnot. They sell them like some nice flashy airplanes, but
But nobody
also,
actually maintains them or knows what to do with them.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But that was kind of one of my things. So there was there's this military history, something called the Flying Tigers. They were, if I remember correctly, they were basically American and European volunteers who went to China in order to fly as the air force for the Chinese Nationalist Army against the Japanese invasion. And basically, like that's where I was wondering, talking about like efficiency with like foreign internal defense. I was kind of wondering, like, one, would it be smart to basically invest in like a low tech air force, or two, alternatively, would that be like a almost like a service that the United States could provide? Is like, hey, you have a military, you have a domestic insurgency problem, like there's these. So, for instance, like Boko Haram or
As you're talking about places like, say, Somalia, Afghanistan, or Iraq, where there's like radical extremist insurgencies.
right.
Okay.
Or alternatively, like Nigeria, where I think they just had like another 300 girls kidnapped by
Wow.
like jihadists or whatever. Like I'm not saying like blow up the girls, but I am saying like having, oftentimes it seems like infantry for other countries are scared to get into a fight because they're actually scared they're going to lose. And oftentimes it seems like Americans are very willing to get into fights because we know we're going to win, not because we're necessarily better infantry, but because we have an air force,
Sure.
and that air force is on call. So that's
Yeah.
where I was thinking. It's like if you give people foreign internal defense, and if you gave them air superiority, at that point they become the dominant political force in the country. Um,
Sure. But see, that'd be nice. It's just unlikely to happen due
hmm,
to, like, a lot of these places aren't politically stable. So it would be based on the country. Some countries
hmm.
aren't politically stable. I don't think the US would be willing to invest money and technology in a place that doesn't have like some form of political stability, in which they can trust that those technologies and that investment's not gonna go down the drain, or even worse, be used for stuff that's
Nefarious.
counter the in the like next decade or so.
Well,
Uh,
there's something. I want everybody to Google it, including you, when we're done. But there's something called a super Takano. It's basically like a two-seater, very light aircraft that's capable of having like very advanced electronics and weapons. But it's basically like it's like a World War II airplane updated for the modern era. So it's like super cheap to fly, super, like all that kind of stuff. And that's what you need. Like we're not, if you're fighting a bush war in Nigeria, you don't need an F-22, $1.5 trillion stealth
sure,
fighter. You
sure.
just need a plane to fly overhead and be like, "Hey, if you don't stop shooting at us, we're gonna start dropping shit on top of you." So yeah. So anyways, but
Yeah, it makes sense.
yeah.
But like that primitive kind of Air Force doesn't solve the issue a lot of the time. Like I'm trying to relate to, like, for example, in Sudan, they bombed the hell out of like Darfur and like South Sudan, like the government using our like whatever primitive air forces we had, which were very primitive, not so often, and lots of people died, but it wasn't enough. I don't think they had enough firepower. They didn't have enough planes. They didn't have, and like some of their planes could be shot down by like anti-air artillery or whatever. I'm honestly not an army person, not sure.
Yeah. No,
But
I know what you're talking about. There's something called like I think it's called a dushka. It's like a Russian heavy machine gun, and they're just all over the place. Yeah, like people pop them on their side and just like shoot them like down streets and all that kind of stuff. But they're supposed to shoot at airplanes. Like,
so they help obviously, but I don't think they solve insurgencies. Like in Sudan, it wasn't insurgency. It was like, you know, like a whole rebel movement. But I can see how it won't like solve the most of these insurgencies or conflicts. But it's good to have still. I wouldn't say, I would say
material
like
conditions.
aerial support, yeah. Aerial support is good. But again, it's expensive. Then you're gonna have to weigh it against, because honestly, most of these problems where there's massive conflicts, none of the governments are particularly good. In Sudan, Iraq, Nigeria, most of these governments are not great. Nigeria is probably the best out of all the examples I brought up. Afghanistan, also government terrible.
I have another question. So oftentimes, like part of the frustration, especially from a Western perspective, is basically like kleptocracy and nepotism. Basically, that like whatever can be taken that isn't nailed down is stolen the next day. Or that like basically like if you go with a certain political faction or whatever, they're not going to advocate for the general well-being of the entire populace. They're just going to promote their cronies, and the sense of like fair play, democracy, all that kind of stuff. It just doesn't seem to pan out. Afghanistan, in particular, financially to the United States feels like, you know, pouring water into a cup that has a hole in the bottom. You know, because it's just like everything that you pour into it just seems to disappear. So that's a frustrating thing. Is that, how do you change that? How do you change that?
It's very hard to change. Based on my experience, like with like foreign aid and then like localized projects and whatnot, depending on the type of relationships the U.S. has with the government, they will either directly support the government financially so it can implement this project, but that would require some level of trust, like that the government is not super corrupt. I'm sure they will expect some corruption, but they expect like something will come out of the investment or the money they pay, and that's something will be good. Otherwise, they probably will not fund the government directly. What they will do is fund either like local organizations, NGOs. US does stuff through like USAID, which is like the development arm of the State Department. So if they don't have a good relationship with the government, they don't trust the government, they will invest in non-governmental basic entities to carry out projects and like development stuff or developmental projects.
Yeah.
The issue with the military is there's only one option. Like if you're going to provide military aid, you can only work with the government. Like who else are you going to support? You can support rebels, but
but then they present their own problems and challenges. And that's kind of where I was thinking, like basically putting it together, like maybe like because Americans, I hate to say this, but there's plenty of adventurous Americans who do view the outside world as Narnia. You get to go out there, you get to shoot some people, blow some stuff up, you get to come home. They make a movie about you. You can cry in the movie about all the people that you killed. I think we joked about that previously. Like you could be like, oh, all the things I did. I blew up this poor guy's country. Like the guy over there is just like, what the fuck? But at the same time, there is this thing of like voluntary adventurism that I think could be harnessed in a positive way, where it's like, for an internal defense, basically you're going there, but you're training the locals to handle their business. And then same thing with like basically like the Flying Tigers, is you might be the pilot and you might be the mechanic and all that kind of stuff, but you are flying in support of their ground troops, their people who are getting trained, their people who are responsible for their country. So instead of saying like, oh, this is just like a foreign place that I get to walk in and blow it up and then cry about it later, it's more like this is Ahmed's country. This is Gasim's country. This is Muhammad's country. And as much as like I'm very excited to blow shit up, I also don't want to blow up, fucking Ahmed's house
Yeah,
because I've eaten food with his wife and she seems like a nice lady. Like,
true.
yeah.
Yeah, that could work.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Like, I guess the leftist perspective would be, or the progressive bleeding heart liberal perspective would be like, instead of investing this money, because most of the stuff is expensive, instead of investing it in supporting these local governments, power struggles or military might, why not invest it in improving, like education, improving services, infrastructure in those countries and whatnot, what so forth. But yeah, I'm sure you'll have an answer.
Well, are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, I'm actually curious because like I'm sure plenty of lefties are watching me and they're like, Connor, why do you keep talking about blowing shit up? I thought you said you need to solve the material conditions. It's because basically you should Google it, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It might be an incorrect psychological analysis, but I think it's very powerful. Which is basically like humans do what they do in a sequence for a reason. So if they have, it's like food, security, social, ego, self-actualization. So basically, if your food needs are met, if your basic security needs are met, if you have shelter, then you'll move on to security needs. If your security needs are being met, you actually have police officers. You're not worried about being shot when you walk down the street. If your country is not in civil war, then you can move into social aspirations. If you have a good family life, if you have a good social life, if you have good friends, if you can go out to clubs, if you can speak to people, then you'll go after ego goals. And if you're going after ego goals, you're going to become a doctor or a lawyer or a pharmacist or something like that. So you can satisfy your inner human need for achievement. And then self-actualization is like just becoming the best kind of human being that you possibly can be. There might be a spiritual element to it, but basically, like if you can't eat, you're not going to be worried about getting shot, and if you can't get shot, you're not going to be. Or wait, if you're going to get shot, you're not worried about making friends, and if you can't make friends, you're not going to be worried about achieving goals, and if you can't achieve goals, then you're not going to be worried about becoming the most actualized and spiritual human being in the world. So
yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, I guess that does address the question in the sense that I guess you're implying that you like going towards a whole education and other stuff comes secondary to establishing like security and stability.
Predictable.
Because you can't actually invest in security, education and some of this infrastructure if there is no security and stability. And I agree with that, like to a large extent. It's very hard to invest in anything if there's no security and stability.
Right. Well, we're a little bit over 60 minutes. I think it was phenomenal. Cool. Was there any other subjects that you wanted to talk about? Was there anything else that you wanted to do?
No, I was just trying to remember that last verse. I was trying to remember, but yeah, it will come to me and I'll send it to you.
Okay.
But what I will say, like towards the original topic is, I don't think there's anything inherently different, like in terms of Islamic scripture. If I remember correctly, word for word, the Bible is more violent. Like if you consider the entirety of the Bible compared to like the Quran, there is like in all scripture there will be lots of contradiction and paradoxes, and that's why I'm saying if you ignore all the good stuff and just focus on the bad stuff that validates your inner bigotry and prejudices and issues with life, you will find them and you will be a horrible human being. That's just the case. And I think actually there's one thing I do find interesting in the way Islam works in terms of like the multifaceted duality of like God can be seen like throughout the Quran is quite explicit. The idea that God is like benevolent and omnipotent and what's the last one, omniscient, as far as I know, is not necessarily the case in Islam, especially when it comes to being benevolent, because God is everything. God has 99 names, right?
I didn't.
Okay, God has 99 names. Out of those 99 names, at least 10 or 15 are directly contradictory. Like one of them is Avenger, one of them is merciful, those things are like contradictory.
Right.
So the nature of God's being is, paradoxical, contradictory, and it kind of reflects the nature of our universe and reality itself in terms of it's lots of the duality slash paradox contradictions in a whole lot of things. So you what I'm saying is you'll find some stuff here, you'll find other stuff there. If you want to validate your horrible like internal bigotries, you'll find ways to do that. If you nitpick, if you cherry pick, if you do all this stuff, that is the case.
Yeah, and that's kind of my thing is like I know because oftentimes in our society, like especially American progressive society or whatever, it's like you're a racist, you're a bigot, you're a misogynist, you're a misandrist, you're whatever, you're this, you're that. What I like about my Christian upbringing is it's really easy to admit that you're a piece of shit. Like it's really easy, like just being like, yeah, I'm an asshole. Like I have bad impulses. I'm judgmental. I'm biased. I'm not as nice as I should be. Sometimes I wake up on the wrong side of the bed and I yell and like all that kind of stuff. But I'm trying. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm trying. I'm trying to understand the world. I'm trying to understand mysteries. I'm trying to be as gracious as I can and all that kind of stuff. And that's why I think these conversations are my favorite, not because we're going to leave them like completely agreeing with each other and like solving all of the world's problems and like all that kind of stuff, but because I now understand at least 3 or 4 new things about geopolitics, reality, linguistics, religion, security, perception, like all that kind of stuff that I didn't know at the start of the conversation. And if I just assumed like, hey, Gasim, Islam sucks and I think they're trying to kill all of us, and you can't change my mind, and basically jihadism is going to be the doom of us all, and blah, 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 blah. And everybody in the Middle East and North Africa is a secret jihadist. Sorry, I knocked something down. What did we learn? Like, what did we learn? And not only what did we learn, but are we any closer to solving the world's problems? And if anything, I would say that we're further away from it.
Probably moving further away from solving them.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Do you want to shout out anything? Do you want to shout out socials? Do you want to shout out any channels that you like? Any people that you like?
No.
Fair. I respect it. Well, yeah. So
I'll eventually, if I make a channel, I'll shout it out, which might happen after I finish my PhD.
Sick. I will wholeheartedly come on repeatedly to debate and also shout it out frequently. So yeah, so this is Gasim. He's one of my favorite people to talk to. He's an excellent human being. He's intelligent. He knows his shit, or at least he pretends to know his shit enough that I can't tell the difference.
That's the key. Yeah. You know why that's good? Because even if you only know 70% of the stuff you want to know, you can easily sell the 30.
Yeah. Confidence is half the battle. So like, share, subscribe, dislike, comment, all that YouTube nonsense, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.
His channel's quite good. His content's very reasonable, despite being a filthy centrist / right winger.
Hey, that's a stellar endorsement from a stellar human being, so I'll take it. All right, catch you guys. Bye.